The Alpha King entered Harper Estate as a servant and found his mate kneeling on his royal seal. Snow had turned the stone courtyard white, except for the silver wolf emblem at its center, where Grace Harper knelt with both hands pressed against the frozen ground. Caroline Harper stood above her in a dark green cloak, watching with the calm satisfaction of someone correcting a stain. "If the king is to walk here tomorrow," she said, "the path must be cleaned by someone who understands her place." Grace lowered her eyes. The silver band around her wrist caught the winter light, glowing faintly before fading again. Adrian Blackwell stopped just inside the gate. To everyone at Harper Estate, he was Evan Brooks, a quiet servant seeking work for the season. In truth, he was the Alpha King of Northwood, ruler of 12 territories, and the man the Harper family had spent months trying to impress. He had come without a crown because polished reports could lie. Servants rarely did. The moment he saw Grace, the wolf inside him rose with a force that nearly broke his disguise. Mate. The word thundered through his chest. Heat flashed beneath the royal mark hidden under his shirt, sharp enough to steal his breath. Grace looked up. She had pale skin, long chestnut hair loosened by the wind, and soft blue eyes that held exhaustion without surrender. For one heartbeat, everything in Adrian recognized her. Then the silver band around her wrist tightened. The bond vanished. His wolf fell silent. Adrian's fingers closed around the handle of his worn travel bag. A true mate bond did not disappear. Something had smothered it. Brooke Harper stood near the front steps in a cream-colored coat, beautiful and perfectly composed. "She spilled tea on my reception gown," she said. "Mother is teaching her responsibility." Grace turned slightly toward the kitchen doors, where 3 frightened girls watched through the glass. "It was not their fault," she said quietly. Caroline's expression hardened. "No one accused them. Please do not punish the kitchen girls." Grace continued, "They had nothing to do with this." Adrian stared at her. She was cold, humiliated, and surrounded by people waiting for her to break, yet her first concern was for someone else. Caroline noticed him at last. "You there, the new servant." Adrian lowered his head before the command in his blood could enter his voice. "Yes, ma'am." "Take her bucket to the back entrance, then report to the steward." He crossed the courtyard and reached for the wooden handle beside Grace. Their fingers touched. Silver light raced beneath her skin. Grace pulled back, startled. Adrian felt the mate bond strike again, stronger this time, before the band darkened and swallowed it. Her gaze dropped to his hands. "You should be careful here," she whispered. "They do not forgive mistakes." "Do you?" he asked. She looked toward the kitchen girls again. "Someone has to." From an upstairs window, Victor Harper watched them with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Beside him, Logan drew the curtain closed. Adrian lifted the bucket and followed Grace toward the servants' entrance. Every instinct now awake. He had come to test the Harper family. Before his first hour inside their home, he already knew the person they treated as worthless was the only one among them with anything worth honoring. By mid-morning, Harper Estate no longer looked like the place where Grace had knelt in the snow. Evergreen garlands framed the entrance, polished lanterns lined the courtyard, and long tables had been arranged beneath white canopies for the family's annual winter charity gathering. Villagers arrived carrying empty baskets, grateful for the flour, blankets, and preserved food the Harpers had promised in honor of the king's coming visit. Adrian stood among the servants with his head lowered, watching Victor Harper greet each guest as though generosity were his natural language. "No one under my roof goes hungry," Victor declared while a royal clerk recorded every word. Caroline placed an arm around Grace's shoulders and smiled toward the gathered witnesses. "We rescued this dear girl when she had nowhere else to go. She has always been like family to us." Grace remained still beneath Caroline's hand. Only Adrian noticed how the silver band around her wrist darkened. Brooke moved among the children in a pale blue coat, handing each one a small loaf, while servants quietly replaced the loaves from a hidden basket whenever the royal clerk looked away. Logan laughed with local landowners and spoke proudly about fair wages, warm rooms, and the dignity of service. The entire performance was flawless. Adrian decided to test it. While carrying folded linens toward the serving tables, he let one corner of a tablecloth slip from his hands. A tray of wooden cups tilted, sending several cups rolling across the packed snow. No glass broke. No one was hurt. Yet Victor's smile vanished the moment the royal clerk turned away. "Idiot," Logan said, stepping toward Adrian. "That display cost us time." Adrian lowered his gaze. "I apologize, sir." An apology does not restore order. Before Logan could continue, Grace hurried forward and gathered the cups. "It was my fault," she said. Adrian looked at her sharply. She had been 20 feet away. Logan knew it too. But relief crossed his face. Of course it was. Caroline removed her arm from Grace's shoulders. "You will make up for this after the guests leave." Grace nodded. The charity gathering ended less than an hour later. As soon as the last carriage disappeared beyond the gate, servants were ordered to collect unopened food from the village baskets. Blankets were counted and returned to storage. Several elderly workers were told the value of their meals would be deducted from future wages. Grace carried the reclaimed loaves toward the pantry, her face carefully empty. Adrian followed with the linens. "Why did you take the blame?" he asked when they were alone. "Because you are new. That does not make it your mistake. Mistakes belong to whoever the Harpers decide can afford them." A door opened behind them. Logan stood at the end of the corridor, adjusting his cufflinks. "Do not worry, Brooks," he said with a thin smile. "Nothing truly goes to waste in this house. Every failure can be transferred to Grace when the full moon comes." The silver band around her wrist pulsed once. Grace lowered her sleeve over it, but not before Adrian saw the fear in her eyes. Logan walked away, whistling softly. Adrian waited until his footsteps disappeared. What did he mean Grace held the basket tighter? "You should forget you hurt him. And if I cannot..." She looked toward the dark hallway leading deeper into the estate. "Then make sure you are gone before the moon is full." That night, the warmth of Harper Estate ended at the servants' staircase. Grace slept beneath it in a narrow room barely 6 feet wide, with a low ceiling, a thin cot, and no fireplace. Frost feathered the inside of the single window. Adrian stood in the doorway holding the blanket the steward had assigned him, though it was little more than a worn strip of wool. "You cannot stay here," Grace said, setting a small plate on the crate that served as her table. "The men's quarters are beyond the laundry room. I came to return this." He held up her sewing needle, which she had left near the pantry. Grace took it and noticed the loose seam along his gray servant coat. "Sit down. It can wait. Not in this cold." She guided him toward the only chair, then knelt beside the lamp and began repairing the torn fabric with careful stitches. Adrian watched her fingers work. The silver band around her wrist looked dull in the amber light, but he could feel something beneath it. A quiet power pressing against a locked door. Grace divided her dinner without hesitation, placing half the bread and stew in front of him. "You need this more than I do," he said. "You carried firewood all afternoon. And you have been watched since you entered the gate." Her soft blue eyes lifted to his. "That is more exhausting." Before Adrian could answer, hurried footsteps crossed the corridor. A kitchen girl appeared in the doorway carrying a small boy who could not have been more than 7. His cheeks were flushed and his breathing came too quickly. "Grace, please," the girl whispered. "Martha says his fever is getting worse." Grace rose at once. She placed the boy on her cot and pressed one palm gently to his forehead. "You should call a physician," Adrian said. "The Harpers charge the cost against our wages," the girl replied. "His mother cannot afford it." Grace closed her eyes. A pale silver glow formed beneath her hand, faint at first, then warm enough to brighten the room. The child's breathing slowed. The tension left his face. Adrian's wolf stirred, recognizing the same ancient energy that had touched the mate bond in the courtyard. Then the silver band tightened around Grace's wrist. The light snapped out. Grace gasped and pulled her hand away. "What happened?" Adrian asked. She covered the band with her sleeve. "Nothing." That was not nothing. The kitchen girl lifted the boy, thanked Grace, and hurried away before anyone could find them. Adrian waited until the corridor was silent. "Why do you wear it?" Grace returned to his coat, but her hands were no longer steady. "Caroline gave it to me when I was 13. Can it be removed? They said it protects the estate." "From what?" "From me." Adrian's expression hardened. Grace mistook his anger for fear and looked away. "They told me that when my power rises, other people become sick, crops fail, wolves lose control. Everyone here would suffer if I ever took it off." Adrian leaned closer, studying the tiny symbols carved into the silver. They were not protective runes, they were binding marks. "And you believed them?" Grace tied off the final stitch and handed back his coat. "I was a child when they put it on me." Her voice softened. "After enough years, fear begins to sound like truth." Adrian slipped into the repaired coat. "Grace, this band is not protecting them from you." She met his eyes, and for one fragile moment, hope appeared there. Then a bell rang beneath the floorboards. The silver band pulsed in answer. Grace went pale. "They are calling me." "For what?" She stood and moved toward the door. "To carry what the family does not want to bear." Grace returned to the servants' corridor nearly an hour later, moving as though every step required thought. Adrian had waited beside the cold window, listening to the silence beneath the floorboards. The silver band around her wrist no longer shone, but the color had drained from her face. "What did they make you carry?" he asked. Grace paused at her door. "Brooke embarrassed a visiting family last week. Logan lost control during a council meeting. Victor's business agreement failed. Those are choices, not burdens. Not in this house." She entered the narrow room and sat on the edge of her cot. The Harpers believe every mistake leaves a shadow. They say someone must hold it until the moonwell can cleanse the family. Adrian crouched before her, careful not to touch the band. And that someone is always you. Grace gave him a tired smile. One person carrying the weight is better than 20. The words stayed with him through the night. By morning, Adrian had decided observation was no longer enough. He needed to see whether the Harpers would choose injustice even when given an easy alternative. Victor was inspecting the east parlor when Adrian entered carrying a tray. A small ceramic vase stood near the edge of a side table. It was inexpensive, recently purchased, and listed in the household inventory. Adrian let his sleeve brush against it. The vase tipped onto the rug and broke into 3 clean pieces. Victor turned at the sound. "What happened?" "I was careless, sir," Adrian said. "I will repay its value." Grace appeared in the doorway with fresh linens. Victor barely looked at Adrian before pointing toward the broken vase. "Another failure under your supervision?" Grace stared at him. I was not in the room. You trained the new servant yesterday. No one assigned me to train him. Victor's expression remained pleasant, almost fatherly. Must every correction become an argument? Adrian stepped forward. The fault is mine. Victor ignored him. Grace will lose 1 month's wages. Her hands tightened around the linens. A month's wages meant winter medicine for Martha and food for the kitchen children. Adrian saw the calculation cross her face. Please deduct it from me instead, he said. Victor finally looked at him. You have earned nothing. Then dismiss me. Grace turned sharply. No, Victor smiled. If Grace refuses responsibility, I will divide the cost among the kitchen staff. The trap was so simple that it revealed everything. Grace lowered her eyes. I accept the deduction. Victor left without another word. Adrian waited until the hallway was empty. You had no part in this, neither did they. You cannot keep paying for everyone. Grace gathered the broken pieces carefully. Maybe not forever, only until someone stronger notices. Adrian almost told her then. He almost gave her his real name, summoned Samuel, and ended the test. But a single punishment would not prove the larger crime. He needed the truth hidden beneath the estate. That evening, moonlight spilled across the snow and painted the manor windows silver. Adrian stood outside the servants' entrance when thin lines of light appeared along the stone walls. They flowed from Victor's room, Caroline's chamber, Logan's suite, and Brooke's dressing room. Every line moved downward, passing through the floor before converging beneath the staircase, beneath Grace's room. Adrian followed the glow to her door. Inside, Grace slept curled beneath a thin blanket while the silver band burned softly around her wrist. The light of the entire Harper family was pouring into her, and with every pulse, her breathing grew weaker. Grace's room before the last silver line could disappear. He knelt beside the cot and placed 2 fingers against her wrist, careful not to touch the band. Her pulse was faint but steady. Grace, he whispered. Her eyes opened slowly. For a moment, she looked at him as though she had forgotten where she was. Then the silver glow beneath the floor faded, and she drew a sharp breath. You should not be here. Neither should that light. She pulled the blanket higher and turned her wrist away. It happens sometimes. Every room in this house was sending something into you. Grace looked toward the door. Please, keep your voice down. What are they taking? I do not know. That was not entirely true, but fear had taught her to protect secrets even from herself. Adrian rose and followed the last trace of silver through the corridor. It slipped beneath the service door, crossed the snowy courtyard, and vanished inside the abandoned greenhouse at the eastern edge of the estate. Grace followed despite his warning. The greenhouse had not held flowers in years. Frost covered the glass panes, dead vines twisted around empty shelves, and the air smelled of cold soil. At the center stood a stone basin carved with crescent moons. Adrian brushed snow from the floor and found a narrow iron ring. Together, they lifted a hidden panel. Stone steps descended into darkness. I have never seen this place, Grace whispered. They made certain you would not. Adrian lit a wall lantern and led the way down. The chamber below was small but carefully maintained. Silver threads ran across the ceiling like veins, all pointing toward a black leather book resting on a pedestal. Beside it stood 4 glass vessels labeled with the Harper family names: Victor, Caroline, Logan, Brooke. Grace approached the book, but the band around her wrist began to pulse. Adrian opened it first. The pages were filled with dates, rituals, and transactions written in Victor's hand. A successful harvest had been credited to Grace's vitality. Victor's recovery from illness had cost her months of strength. Logan's first full shift had been taken from her dormant wolf. Brooke's false Luna scent had been drawn from Grace's bond. Caroline's public charm had been sustained by the emotional calm Grace carried for everyone else. Grace read each line in silence. "They told me I was dangerous," she said. "They were afraid you would learn the opposite." Adrian turned another page. The handwriting changed near the end, becoming sharper and more hurried. A final entry had been underlined twice. "Royal banquet, complete transfer. Subject will retain no wolf." Grace stared at the words. What does that mean? Adrian already knew. The Harpers planned to drain the last living part of her gift and place it inside Brooke before the king arrived. They intended to present a false Luna wearing Grace's strength while leaving Grace unable to hear her own wolf again. Beneath the final entry, another note had been added. If the subject resists, 24 household contracts will be reassigned to the Moonwell. Grace closed the book with trembling hands. They will use the others. Not if I stop them. You are one servant. Adrian looked at her, and for the first time, the disguise felt smaller than the truth between them. Then perhaps they have underestimated the servant. Footsteps sounded above the hidden stairs. Victor's voice entered the greenhouse, calm and close. "Grace, I know you are down there." Grace froze beneath the greenhouse floor while Victor's footsteps crossed the boards above them. Adrian closed the moon ledger and slipped it beneath his servant coat. The hidden chamber had only one entrance, and Victor was standing directly over it. "Grace!" he called again, his tone patient enough to be frightening. "The rehearsal is beginning." She looked at Adrian. "If he finds you here, he will blame the kitchen staff. Let him blame me. That is not how this house works." Before Adrian could answer, Grace climbed the stairs and pushed open the panel. Victor stood beside the stone basin with Caroline, Brooke, and Logan behind him. Brooke wore a silver pendant at her throat, its pale light matching the band around Grace's wrist. Victor's gaze moved from Grace to Adrian. "Brooks, I do not remember assigning you to the greenhouse." Adrian lowered his head. "I followed Miss Grace when I saw her leave the house." Concerned for her safety, Caroline asked. Her smile carried no warmth. How admirable. Grace stepped between them. "He was only helping me repair the lantern." Victor studied her face, then glanced toward the hidden panel. He knew. Adrian could see it in the sudden stillness around his eyes. Yet Victor merely extended one hand toward the manor. "Then you may both attend the rehearsal. It is time our new servant understood what loyalty looks like." The Moonwell chamber beneath the East Hall had been prepared with white candles and silver ribbons. 24 household workers stood along the walls, each wearing a paper contract tied with blue cord. At the center, a circle of polished silver surrounded a shallow basin filled with clear water. Grace stopped at its edge. "This was not supposed to happen until tomorrow. The king may arrive early," Caroline said. "We cannot risk imperfection." Brooke stepped into the outer circle, her pendant resting over her heart. Victor gestured for Grace to enter the inner ring. Adrian remained among the servants, every muscle held under strict control. Samuel had been ordered not to intervene until Adrian sent the royal signal. He had expected deception. He had not expected this. Grace took her place. The silver band around her wrist awakened at once. Thin lines of light rose from the floor and curved toward Brooke. Grace's breath caught. Brooke's pendant brightened. "Think of the household," Victor said. "Think of everyone who depends on you." Grace looked toward the workers holding their contracts. Fear moved through the room in silence. She closed her eyes. The ritual began without chanting, without spectacle. That made it worse. Grace's soft silver light lifted from her skin and flowed across the circle toward Brooke, who stood taller with every passing second. Adrian felt the mate bond weaken until it was almost nothing. His wolf surged against the disguise, furious and desperate. One command from him would end the ceremony. One word would bring the royal guard through every door. He stepped forward. Grace opened her eyes and saw him. For a moment, she seemed surprised by the power in his face. Then her gaze shifted toward the contracts lining the wall. She gave the smallest shake of her head. "Do not. Not yet." Adrian stopped. The light continued to leave her until the silver band went dark. Grace swayed but remained standing. Brooke touched the pendant and smiled as a false lunescent filled the chamber. Victor exhaled with satisfaction. Perfect. Grace pressed one hand to her chest. Inside the quiet place where her wolf had always waited, there was no answer. For the first time in her life, she heard nothing at all. The Moonwell chamber emptied slowly, as though everyone feared the silence Grace carried out with her. Brooke left first, surrounded by Caroline and Logan, the stolen Luna scent trailing behind them like a lie dressed in perfume. Victor remained only long enough to remind the household workers that their contracts would be reviewed before the royal banquet. Then he followed his family upstairs. Grace waited until the last candle was extinguished before stepping into the corridor. Her hand stayed pressed against her chest. The emptiness inside her was not pain. Pain would have meant something was still there to answer. Adrian followed at a distance until they reached the abandoned laundry room near the western wall. He closed the door behind them. "Can you hear her?" he asked. Grace did not pretend to misunderstand. She shook her head. "My wolf has always been quiet, but she was there. I could feel her breathing when I was afraid." Her voice thinned. "Now there is nothing." Adrian's control nearly broke. The moon ledger felt heavy beneath his coat, every page a record of what the Harpers had stolen while calling themselves generous. "There is a passage behind that cabinet," he said. "It leads beyond the north fence. We can be in the village before sunrise." Grace looked at him. I am not leaving you here." He moved the cabinet aside, revealing a narrow stone opening and a staircase descending into darkness. Cold air flowed upward, carrying the scent of pine. Freedom was less than half a mile away. Grace stood at the entrance, but did not step through. "What happens to the others?" "I will find help. When? Soon. That is not an answer." Adrian met her gaze. He could tell her everything now. He could say that royal guards waited beyond the southern ridge and that one signal from him would bring them to the estate. But Victor still controlled the servants through the contracts. And Grace had already lost too much because powerful men believed they knew what was best for her. Adrian needed her trust, not her obedience. Grace reached inside her apron and removed a folded sheet of paper. 24 names had been written in careful rows. Beside each name was a debt, a family member, or a threat. "I copied this from Victor's office last month," she said. "If I leave, these people replace me in the Moonwell. Some have children. Some are too old to survive another winter without wages." She placed the list in Adrian's hand. "Take it to the king." His fingers closed around the paper. "Why trust me?" "Because when everyone else looked away, you looked angry." A sad smile touched her face. "And because you still believe servants deserve answers." Adrian glanced toward the open passage. "Grace, come with me." She stepped backward. Not until they are free. You may not get another chance. Then make this one matter. She turned toward the door, but paused before leaving. Tell the king we were not servants. We were prisoners wearing clean uniforms. Adrian watched her walk back toward the house that had taken her name, her strength, and now her wolf. Then he reached beneath his collar and removed a small silver ring engraved with the royal crest. He pressed it against the stone wall. Far beyond the estate, a matching signal flared in Samuel's hand. The test was over. Harper Estate glittered as though no sorrow had ever crossed its doors. Hundreds of candles burned beneath the crystal chandeliers. Musicians played near the marble staircase, and nobles from across the Eastern Territories filled the great hall. Victor Harper stood beneath the silver wolf emblem, welcoming them with practiced warmth. Our family has always believed that power means service, he announced. Every worker beneath this roof is treated with dignity. Adrian remained among the servants in his plain gray coat, the moon ledger hidden beneath it. Beyond the tall windows, dark shapes moved silently through the snow. Samuel had received the signal. Brooke entered beside Caroline wearing a white and silver gown, the pendant at her throat glowing with Grace's stolen scent. A murmur of approval passed through the gathered wolves. Some lowered their heads, mistaking borrowed power for destiny. Victor smiled. My daughter has been blessed with a rare connection to the moon. With His Majesty's approval, she may soon stand as a candidate for Luna. The applause ended when Logan opened the side doors. Grace was brought into the hall between two household stewards. Her silver band was dark, her face pale, but she walked without lowering her head. Victor held up an empty leather cover. This Omega attempted to steal a sacred family record and flee before the royal visit. Caroline stepped forward. After everything we gave her, she chose betrayal. Grace looked across the room until she found Adrian among the servants. For the briefest moment, relief touched her eyes. She believed he had escaped with the list. She did not know he had returned with an army. Kneel, Caroline ordered, pointing toward the royal seal set into the floor. Grace remained standing. Logan moved closer. You heard her. Adrian stepped out of the servants' line. She will not kneel. Every face turned toward him. Victor's expression tightened. Brooks, return to your place. Adrian continued forward. The quiet authority in his stride silenced the room more completely than any shout. I know my place. Victor descended from the platform. You are a hired servant speaking above your station. Adrian stopped beside Grace. I was a servant in this house because I chose to be. He removed the moon ledger from beneath his coat and placed it on the ceremonial table. Caroline's composure vanished. Brooke's hand flew to her pendant. Where did you get that? Victor demanded. Adrian reached for the collar of his gray coat and pulled it open. Beneath it rested the black and silver uniform of Northwood, with the royal wolf crest over his heart. The main doors opened. Samuel entered with 2 lines of royal guards, then lowered himself to one knee. Your Majesty. Shock moved through the great hall like winter wind. Victor stumbled backward. Brooke stared at Adrian, unable to breathe. Grace looked at him with disbelief, then hurt, as every quiet moment between them changed meaning. Adrian faced Victor. I entered this estate to learn how the Harper family treated people when they believed no one powerful was watching. He opened the ledger. You called exploitation charity. You called imprisonment service. You stole an Omega strength and presented it as your daughter's virtue. Victor tried to speak, but Adrian raised one hand. The test ended the moment Grace protected your servants while you prepared to erase her wolf. Samuel placed the 24 contracts beside the ledger. Adrian looked across the silent hall. You were tested by the king you abused, and you failed before the first day ended. Then he turned to Grace, not as a ruler demanding loyalty, but as the man who had finally brought the truth into the light. The hall remained silent until Adrian turned from Grace and faced the gathered nobles. "These contracts are void," he said. Samuel lifted the 24 pages and placed them beside the moon ledger. "Every worker held by debt, threat, or false obligation is free as of this moment." A sound moved through the servants behind Grace. Not quite a cheer, not yet. It was the first breath of people who had forgotten what freedom felt like. Victor tried to defend the family name, but Adrian stopped him with a look. "The estate will remain under royal protection while every account is reviewed. No wage will be withheld. No servant will be punished for speaking the truth." Caroline's carefully practiced smile disappeared. Logan lowered his eyes. Brooke touched the pendant at her throat as though it might still save her. Adrian looked at her. "Remove it." Her hands trembled as she unclasped the silver chain. The moment the pendant left her skin, the false lunescent faded from the room. Grace felt the silver band around her own wrist grow warm. A faint pulse answered inside her chest. Not a voice, not yet, but something alive. Adrian stepped closer, then stopped several feet away. "Grace, before anyone speaks of destiny, tell me what you want." No king had ever asked her that. The question felt more powerful than any command. She looked toward the servants who had stood beside the walls for years, invisible in clean uniforms. "Return every dollar taken from their wages," she said. "Turn the Moonwell into a place of healing. Let no Omega carry another family's failures again. And Brooke must live without borrowed power." Adrian nodded after each request. "It will be done." Grace lifted her wrist. "Then I choose to remove this." Martha brought a small silver key hidden for years inside the kitchen chapel. Grace placed it into the band, but the lock would not turn. The moon ledger opened by itself on the ceremonial table, its final page shining beneath the chandeliers. Samuel read the forgotten line aloud. "The Moonwell belongs to the first daughter who bears its healing light." Grace understood. The Harpers had never owned the blessing they displayed. They had built their reputation on her inheritance. She closed her eyes and thought of the feverish child, the frightened kitchen girls, and every person she had protected while believing she was the danger. Silver light rose beneath her skin. The band opened and fell softly onto the marble floor. Warm radiance traveled through the hall, touching tired servants, frightened children, and the workers weakened by the moonwell. Color returned to their faces. Inside Grace, her wolf breathed again. The mate bond awakened between her and Adrian, clear and steady, but he did not reach for her. He lowered himself to one knee. "They called you weak because you carried what would have broken them," he said. Grace placed her hand in his only when she was ready. "And I choose you because you gave the choice back to me." This story reminds us that kindness is not weakness, and sacrifice is not permission for others to keep taking. Grace spent years carrying burdens that never belonged to her, yet she did not allow cruelty to decide who she became. Adrian's true strength appeared when he stopped commanding and started listening. In my view, love only becomes worthy when freedom comes first. Do you think Grace should have forgiven the Harper family? Or should some betrayals end a relationship forever? Share your thoughts in the comments. and subscribe for more stories where truth exposes false power, dignity survives injustice, and the forgotten finally choose their own destiny.